All right. Good evening, YouTube. My name's Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. Tonight, specifically, we are not going to talk about new wave of British heavy metal, and we are not going to talk about American metal. Looking back through the recent videos I've done, I've been hitting on those two scenes quite a bit in the weeks and maybe months in recent time. So I figured tonight it's time to revisit a different scene that I've done some videos on before, but I haven't been paying enough attention to. So tonight it's time for a trip to Sweden to check out the first wave of Swedish heavy metal. And to help me out with this, I have a special assistant tonight. It's this creepy puppet. Hi, Alan. So what is the first wave of Swedish heavy metal anyway? Well, you see, creepy puppet, this isn't really working, is it? Not even close. Okay, why don't you just get out of here, creepy puppet? It's funny when chromium dioxide does it. Oh, fuck you, creepy puppet. Philip's not here. I tried. Hey, we all miss Castillo. Maybe he's back soon. Maybe by now, depending on when this video is released. I don't know. Get well soon, buddy. Where were we? Yeah, we were going to talk first wave of Swedish heavy metal. If this is a scene you're not particularly familiar with, it just refers to the grassroots heavy metal movement that occurred in Sweden in the early and mid 1980s. It parallels the new wave of British heavy metal in a lot of ways. You had a lot of small bands with a do-it-yourself attitude, releasing their own singles, getting tracks put onto compilation albums, things like that. So yeah, very comparable in terms of what happened in Sweden compared to the UK. You don't really hear as much about the first wave of Swedish heavy metal for, I guess, a handful of reasons. One, you never had folks like Brian Slagel and Lars Ulrich champion the Swedish scene. There was no, 79 Swedish Meatballs Revisited compilation put out years later. The press in Sweden didn't really sort of, latch onto the scene and hype it up in the music press the way that Krang and other zines did in the British scene in 1979 and 1980. And yeah, the Swedish scene also kind of quickly wound down due to the success of bands like Europe that took things in a much more, commercial direction, more accessible. I've heard other Swedish collectors grumble that, yeah, once Europe started getting bigger, all the bands either kind of disappeared or changed their sound. But there were a lot of cool bands on the first wave of Swedish heavy metal scene, and a lot of them did release some pretty cool tracks. So we'll check a few of those out. Everyone's heard of a few first wave of Swedish heavy metal bands. Bathory, of course, is sort of the big standout. Also a real anomaly, as not many other bands on the scene played nearly that heavy that early on. Swedish, of course, became really fertile ground for extreme metal as you got into the later 1980s. But in the early and mid 80s, yeah, they were sticking to, more of, a straightforward denim and leather sound. And if anything, it probably did lean a little more into accessible territory than a lot of new wave of British heavy metal did. But Bathory was, definitely an influencer, as were Candlemass. And again, a little bit of an anomaly because not a lot of the Swedish bands adopted a very heavy, doomy, Black Sabbath-inspired sound, although there were some, and we'll check out an example of one of those here tonight. Other bands also did fairly well for themselves, bands like Overdrive. But yeah, overall, the scene's never quite gotten the same amount of attention or respect as the British scene did, which is kind of a shame. So tonight we want to give them a little bit of love, check out some of the really cool singles that came out. If you're looking for a lot more information on the first wave of Swedish heavy metal, best resource to check out is the Corrosium website. I'm not really sure if it's Corrosium or Corosium. I always thought of it as Corosium, like a corrosive museum, but most folks seem to pronounce it Corrosium. So I don't know. Anyway, Corrosium, excellent heavy metal collector website. It's been run for probably pushing 20 years now by Dan, a great fellow out of Sweden. The site is chock full of great stuff. It is a heavy metal collector's just, dream come true in terms of information on obscure bands, anthologies, discographies, the whole 9 yards. And Dan did a lot to help sort of raise the visibility of some first wave of Swedish heavy metal bands. There's an excellent article there entitled 707 Inches of Swedish Steel, which is a good primer on a lot of the cool singles from the era. Another source, if you're looking for something in print, there have been some books. Jan Stark from Overdrive did some volumes on Swedish hard rock and heavy metal. This is volume 2. I don't have a copy of volume 1. I think these are a little hard to track down now. They may have slipped out of print. I don't think they've been reprinted. The book is not really something to read. It's very, very good if you're looking for information on catalog numbers, just raw discography information, pictures of bands, stuff like that. And it does cover a lot of Swedish metal overall, not just first wave of Swedish heavy metal. So lots of cool stuff in these books if you're looking for more detailed information on some of the releases. But I have blathered on long enough, and we're just going to pretend that whole puppet thing didn't happen, okay? We cool? We're cool. Let's start off tonight with a band that was partly Swedish, but also had members trekking in from Finland, so they had a little bit of an international feel to them. And this is the band Hiroshima. Did this 7-inch single in 1983 with songs Soldier of the World and Nuclear Nightmare. And let's check out a little bit of the A-side, Soldier of the World. I want to jump about 50 seconds into this, just because it has a little bit of a longer intro. And let's get right to the good stuff. All right, very cool high energy track from Hiroshima with Soldier of the World. Hiroshima did release an album in 1984 called Taste of Death. It's been a long time since I heard the album, but I remember it being quite good, kind of a similar style. The flip side on the singles also very good. They have almost a little bit of a punky vibe and energy to the music. Really good stuff, strong vocal performance. Something worth pointing out about first wave of Swedish heavy metal bands is that a fair number of them did opt to sing in Swedish. And that may be something that did play against the scene a little bit in terms of their international popularity. But a lot of them also did stick to English. And Hiroshima, of course, singing in English and sounding quite good at it. Really like that particular single. A pain in the ass to find. Some of these singles vary a lot. Of course, they're a little easier to find in Europe, a little harder to find here in the States. But yeah, was eventually able to track that one down. It was one of the last first wave of Swedish heavy metal singles that was on my want list for a very long time. So happy to add that one. Not a whole lot else to add about the band. Most of these bands did not have members go on to fame and fortune and really long careers in the music industry. Seems like a lot of the bands pretty much melted away after they did their couple of demos or their singles or their compilation tracks. So without further ado, we'll move right on to single number 2. This is a personal favorite. Really like this one. It is a band called HELS, H-E-L-S. And they had this one 7-inch plus a couple of songs on a compilation or like a split 7-inch, if I remember right. And this one is from 1985, and we're going to check out a little bit of the song Death. And we'll jump forward a little bit in this one too. let's go a little further. Here we go. All right, there's HELS, a really cool, creepy little doomy number called Death from their Birth and Backside Death single from 1985. Again, not a whole lot of other output noted for this particular band. Like I mentioned, they had I'm double checking the details on this now. But yeah, it was a split called Clip Rock Volume 1 that came out a couple of years later in 1987. But that's the only other thing I'm aware of by the band. It's one of the few Swedish bands from that era that went for this sort of, darker, doomier sound, which is a little surprising given the success of Candlemass that other bands didn't follow suit in that vein. But I think they did a really good job on that one. It's got a very good creepy vibe. It almost reminds me a little bit of early and mid 80s Italian doom metal in a way. It's got that same just kind of eeriness to it, makes you feel a little bit uneasy. So very cool single. Another one that is kind of hard to track down. A lot of these first wave of Swedish heavy metal singles, again, there's a strong parallel to the new wave of British heavy metal collecting scene. Some of the singles are very hard to track down and can be very expensive. Others are relatively easy to find and don't sell for a whole lot. So you kind of have to navigate your way through the scene. And again, just because something is rare and expensive doesn't mean that it's one of the better items musically. Sometimes it's just extremely rare or one that is just still on a lot of want lists for some reason. Some of the easier to find ones can often be some of the better singles. So yeah, it runs a wide gambit within the whole scene. All right, so let's move on to single number 3 for the night. This one is by a band called Jackwave, and they released this song, one single called King of the Sea with backside I Will Be There. So let's check out a little bit of this before we talk a little bit more about Jackwave.
Just a shadow in the dark.
Jackwave, really good high energy number, very catchy, strong sense of melody. Like the single quite a bit. The band picture on the front doesn't really tell you much about what's going to be inside of it. But yeah, for my money, it's one of the better first wave of Swedish heavy metal singles. Just really excellent songs. The flip side is slower, a little bit ballady, but it still has good power to it. It's not a really sappy love song or anything like that. The band did record one other single after it. That single was in 1986, and they did another single in 87, I think, but it was only done as a test pressing. It never actually got a proper release at the time. So it's just a couple of copies of the test pressing that have turned up over the years. The band did demo additional tracks, and they did get the anthology treatment here within the past year or so. So if that strong really struck your fancy, you can pick up the Jackwave anthology and hear most of the material right there, all in one place, easy to access for a good price. So really cool to see that some of these first wave of Swedish heavy metal bands are getting some love from these reissue and reprint labels that are digging up older tracks by bands and getting them out there for a wider audience to appreciate. Because again, tracking these old singles down is a real pain. It's definitely not for everybody. And it's cool to have this music more available to a wider audience. All right. For our next entry tonight, we're going to go back to 1982 with a very sort of small act. They only did this one recording, to my knowledge. It's a band with the unlikely name of Shakepeare, and they released this one with Orphan Devil, backed with Sneaking Around. So let's check out a little bit of the track Orphan Devil. And again, I'm going to jump forward just a bit. All right, Shakepeare with a really cool track, Orphan Devil. As I mentioned before the clip, that band doesn't seem to have done any other recordings. I haven't seen anything else listed by them, not even demos or anything, which is a real shame. I think the single is actually pretty strong. They very much remind me a bit of Merciful Fate. The vocalist is doing his best to sound a bit like King Diamond singing in his lower register, and doing a pretty passable job of it. So kudos there on the vocal performance. The Shakepeare single is one that has been reissued as a bootleg on colored vinyl. If I remember right, it's a either clear or red vinyl pressing. I used to have it, and I don't think I do anymore. So I don't remember exactly which color vinyl. This same thing happened with a lot of new wave of British heavy metal singles in the earliest 2000s, around the turn of the century, where some of the older rare ones, and even some that weren't that rare, got bootlegged on various overseas endeavors, and they were all put out on different colors of vinyl. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure the Shakepeare was on purple vinyl. So if you come across colored vinyl copies of the Shakepeare, no, you have not found some amazing rarity. You've actually just found a much later rip-off press of it. So still a cool way to hear the music. It's a single that's actually not one of the more expensive ones out of the first wave of Swedish heavy metal scene, and is a very cool one for my money. Definitely like both the songs on that one. All right, that brings us to our fifth and last entry for the night. And this is one of my favorite singles from the entire first wave of Swedish heavy metal. And it includes one of my favorite songs of all time from any genre or any movement. I am talking here about a band called Scratch. They released this one single around 1984. No, sorry, 85. And it includes the tracks Before the Rain and Metal Breaker. And it's Metal Breaker that we're going to check out just a little bit of here. One of the best metal anthems of all time, in my opinion. Here we go. Scratch absolutely kills it on Metal Breaker. As just great energy, very catchy, great solos, great vocals, everything you could want in that kind of high-powered, sing-along, anthemic European heavy metal. Love that track. I've loved it since the very first time I heard it. A little history on the Scratch single and band. The single came to most collectors' attention when it was oddly featured on the new wave of British heavy metal bootleg compilation series. It was a series of CD releases in the 1990s that featured a lot of very obscure new wave of British heavy metal singles, helped bring a lot of those things to the light for the first time. And Scratch was one of the very few and possibly only non-British band that ended up featured in the track list. A lot of people speculated that it sounded so much like new wave of British heavy metal that people making the bootlegs had assumed it was a British band, and it didn't really figure it out until later that it was actually a Swedish band. It's also possible they just included it because it was such a kick-ass song, they wanted to put it somewhere, and they didn't really have plans to do a first wave of Swedish heavy metal bootleg CD at the time, so they figured, what the heck, it's my party and I'll play the Scratch single and put it on the CD comp if I want to. So yeah, kind of got on a lot of people's radars on that series. It was on volume 4, which was the strongest volume out of that bootleg CD series. Featured a lot of incredibly obscure but very, very good stuff in terms of musical quality. The single has made headlines at times. It's one that at some points in the past has sold for pretty crazy money. I don't think it brings nearly that much anymore. I think it's kind of the market for that one's kind of quieted down a bit over the years. It's still a hard one to find and can still be a bit expensive. But thankfully, this is another band that has benefited from the anthology treatment in recent years. So you can hear the single plus some other tracks that the band demoed without having to track down, this crazy, obscure little single from the mid 1980s of Sweden. All right, that's what we've got for tonight. So let's wrap this video up and then let's talk metal in the comments down below. What are some of your favorite first wave of Swedish heavy metal singles that I didn't mention tonight? This is something that I have a small but fairly nice little collection of. I don't have a huge number of them. They're always just a little, too hard to track down in the US to ever get bulk quantity of the scene. There's also a lot of them that I'm not, that nuts about. I've got tons of them on digital files from the old CD and tape trading days. But some of them are a little too lightweight or a little too amateurish. There's some great ones where the band sings in Swedish. I just have no clue what the heck they're saying or what the song titles are. Not a clue. But what are your favorites? There'll be another first wave of Swedish heavy metal video on this channel sooner or later. What are some things you think I need to include next time around? Do I need to go back and edit out the creepy puppet, or we're just going to continue to pretend that didn't happen? I'm okay with the later because editing videos, not always that much fun. All right, until next time then, everybody, take care. And as always, keep banging your head and don't mess with puppets unless you're Phil.